So now that we've completed our sand core, which is kind of just a one-off task for the overall process, now comes the time where we pack up the mold, ram up the mold, or what they call a flask here is the frame. There's a two-part frame, and you'll see that in the video. This is the pattern I showed you earlier for a Greek Sauroter, and I'm going to split it in half here. Notice there are pegs on one side to help the two halves line up when you put the mold all back together again. So we will begin by placing one half of the mold in what ultimately will be the bottom half of the flask, and give it a little dusting with talc. Talcum powder, proper mineral talc. I know what some of you are going to say, isn't that toxic, isn't that bad for your lungs? Maybe, probably. I've done a whole bunch of, reading online, which isn't necessarily definitive. You can't really trust the internet for a lot of stuff. But there have been studies in both directions saying it's good, it's bad, it's indifferent. I don't use a lot of it, so I think I'm probably going to be just fine. Anyways, so a little bit of talc on there so that when we flip the mold over, this piece, when the time comes, can be lifted out of the mold more easily. Next, we're going to start putting sand on top of that half. And this isn't, what I use isn't particularly Bronze Age. I know I talk about some things being appropriate to the Bronze Age and other things not. This is just Petrobond, that's what I use some of the time, although I'm experimenting with olivine sand and making my own green sand out of fine silica sand. Those experiments proceed. Hopefully I will get a better alternative to Petrobond in due course that doesn't create as much smoke when you pour the bronze in as the oil burns. But that day is not today. I'm just gonna, this is just a sand sifter like you would have for flour in the kitchen. Strange how many kitchen tools end up out here in the workshop. That's just the way it is. But I'm going to put a nice fine grain layer of Petrobond on top, so all the little nooks and crannies get filled in more easily. And then once the pattern is properly covered, we can put in bigger lumps of Petrobond and save ourselves some time as we ram everything down. And that should just about do it. I think what I'm going to do is put the camera on fast forward and speed through this next bit because it's frankly pretty boring. But I'll talk to you again in a few minutes. Alright, so if I did all that properly, you saw in the fast forward there me packing or ramming the one half of the mold, and when I flipped it over the bit of the pattern fell out, which is good, it means it's not stuck in there. But for the next step I need of course to put it back in, get it in there nicely, and this is where the I've lost the other half of, oh there it is, my pattern. The pegs on the inside come in handy because of course you want the two halves of the pattern to line up perfectly. And when I created it, I created those pegs to help with just that task. So there. Now, of course, we're going to handle the top half of the mold. And so I've got the matching piece. It goes on like that. I'm going to latch it together. Again, for a nice proper alignment. Now I'm going to give it another dusting on top here of talc, so that when I take the two halves apart, they will part nicely, evenly, without any trouble. So I'm just gonna give that a little dusting, not too much, a little dab will do ya. There. And now I'm going to just repeat basically on this side what you saw earlier in the fast forward portion. I'm just going to pack this half with Petrobond as well, and you don't really need to watch that again. And that's the other half of the mold, the top half. Let's see what happened if I did everything properly. When I lift the top half off, because of the talc layer that was put in, everything should come away cleanly. And I think we're in good shape here. So you get a decent cavity now in the mold. And if I've done things properly, I should be able to just lift this pattern away and just leave behind both halves of the cavity. Now what's going to happen next here, a couple of things. I'm going to poke some holes through the top of the mold to allow gas to escape, as you know, again, when the oil in the Petrobond, the oil binder, heats up, burns essentially, it has to escape somewhere, and you don't want the mold bursting, so you need to give it a way to get out of the cavity. So I'm just going to poke a couple of holes down through the top. Sorry, strange phrasing. Through what will be the top at various points along the way, just so gas doesn't collect there. Also, as the liquid bronze moves into the mold and fills the cavity, the air that's in there as it heats and just in general has to have a way to get out. So you need to provide an exit for that escaping gas or evacuating gas, whatever the right term is. The other thing I want to do is to figure out where I'm going to put the sprue, or the hole, for the bronze to go in, the liquid bronze to go in. So I'm going to mark a spot here. Let me think now. It's going to have to go in this end. Much of it is going to have to go in. I think I'm going to put it about here. And about, I don't know, halfway into center. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the top half of the mold back on the mold, or flask, I guess, whatever the phrasing is. Sorry, I'm just being delicate here with this because the sand is packed pretty tight, so it's unlikely to fall out at this point, but if I jar it or shock it too much, it will come out. So, I got you in there. Oh, I've got... There we go. All right, so as I said, I'll create the sprue. It's about halfway there. I realized I put my pencil mark in a spot I can't see it once everything's together. So this then doesn't go all the way through, it goes down just past the top half and will be where I ultimately pour the liquid bronze into the mold, and then I'll have to create a little runner so that the bronze can run from here into the cavity. I'll just tighten up the sides here, make it a little bit conical as well to help the flow. Give me a bigger target to hit as I'm pouring. But also to help focus the incoming, maybe that's not the right word, focus the incoming liquid bronze. So we'll take the top back off again. You see this is the bottom end of the tube that we just plugged in, so I'm going to cut myself a little pool cavity right there for it to pool in. And cut a little channel. So the bronze will go down through the sprue into this little puddle and then flow into the cavity. Hopefully nice and evenly, so the whole thing gets filled. Push that down a little bit, because the last thing you want is a bunch of free, well, maybe not the last thing, but one of the very last things you want is for loose sand to be mixed in with the bronze as it goes into the cavity, into the mold, and solidifies. Oops. Banged that corner a bit, I'll fix that. There we go. And the last step, the one we've been talking about in the last video or two, is to put this guy, our sand core, into the mold. And it's just a little bit too long. I expect you can see that, so I'll just cut a little out here. Of course, I'll have to do the same on this, on the top half as well. And again, hopefully you can see this, but there is a gap all the way around this as it extends into the mold. And my hope, my fervent hope, my prayer, is that that gap is big enough to allow the liquid bronze to flow in to the space just before it cools, or solidifies, I guess, really, such that it can fill in down here, this bigger space down here, and then not leave any gaps, like there aren't any pinchy spots where the wall of the petrobond is too close to the sand core, so the bronze can't get in there. But we'll see. Fingers crossed, right? The other thing I do, now that that's fitted in there, make sure it fits in the top as well. About right. There we go. The other tip I picked up online is to coat the sand core with graphite powder. And I could dust it with the same brush, but what I found is if I just give it a little dip in there, and that helps protect the sand core just that little bit longer. And in this process, like a fraction of a second can make all the difference between a successful cast and an unsuccessful cast. So, taking every precaution I can. And again, graphite would have been, again, this is me comparing what is and is not Bronze Age, when clearly I use a lot of non-Bronze Age techniques. But graphite is just charcoal, basically. They could have gotten graphite from charcoal. So not an alien thing to them, or not an unusual material. All right, so now the weight of this means that when I let go, it's going to topple into the mold. But when I put the top back on, it'll straighten that out. So it is extending, as I've described before, out into the space of the cavity. And I think we're about ready to cast.